Who is the medium suspect? Does Dwight have an accomplice? And what about Paul Lieberstein's interview? The investigation continues on the Anti-Strangling Task Force. For almost 20 years, there is one scene which Office fans have comedically used to justify their Scranton Strangler theories.
It's never the person you most suspect. It's also never the person you least suspect, since anyone with half a brain would suspect them the most. Therefore, I know the killer to be Phyllis, a.k.a. Beatrix Bourbon. The person I most medium suspect.
The usual theory template goes something like this. I believe, insert character name here, is the Scranton Strangler, because they, insert scene and episode, did this. Lastly, they are also the person I most medium suspect. If you're an Office fan, you definitely would have seen this pop up on one of your feeds at least a dozen times. Now, ignoring the fact that this level of investigation is nothing short of a gross, extreme, and egregious case of prosecutorial misconduct, the significance of this scene has been completely misunderstood until now. Let's start our analysis off by isolating this moment. Firstly, we once again have another echo of the Curse of Three. And if you've been following this investigation closely, you'll know that we've covered a number of applications of the Curse of Three. We have the 3-shot secret sign in the intro sequence, the 3 months motif, there are 3 Dwight Schrutes, and Dwight goes for his strolls thrice weekly. And you're probably noticing a pattern here that every time the Curse of Three is echoed, it has some sort of significance to the Scranton Strangler mystery. Now that includes this scene, and moving forward, we're going to refer to this scene as the medium suspect prophecy. So what is its significance? An initial uninformed analysis actually raises some problems, with the primary one being a lack of objective direction. So what do I mean by this? Whichever way we decide to build this list, it always ends up being open to too much interpretation. Firstly, do we build the list with everyone in the office? Do we include Bob Kazamakis, Gabe? Do we include Andy? What about Dwight's friends? Any attempt to build a list would be all over the place, and then after doing so, we would have to find the medium suspect. It's just not accurate enough. Okay, well, then we could say we're going to boil it down to 3 suspects and go from there. But even this is open to too much interpretation. I mean, people have accused Toby, Gabe, Bob Kazamakis, Mose, Dwight, Rolf Ahl. It still doesn't really get us anywhere. We're still not able to really narrow down the suspects. Well, what about in the context of our investigation? What about in the context of what the Anti-Strangling Task Force has discovered? Well, it raises a different type of problem, namely that we know that Dwight is the Scranton Strangler. So how can there still be 3 suspects? For those who are new to the channel, in the Scranton Strangler Revealed Part 1 episode, we covered the Curse of 3 secret sign in the intro sequence, specifically focusing on Ryan's bag. We followed the clues, we found Dwight's serial killer outfit, and we even got a kill count of 12 people. Dwight is not a suspect. Dwight is definitively guilty. Yet a number of seasons later, the creators drop this bomb on us. Now, there is one way that this can make sense. The only way Dwight could be guilty and there also be 3 additional suspects is if there's a second Scranton Strangler.
There's a world where he was the Strangler, maybe one where he wasn't. Maybe there's 2 Stranglers.
Oh! Now we're going to come back to this video a little bit later in this episode because this video is so often referenced as the final answer to the mystery. So many fans always reference this interview with Paul Lieberstein as case closed, but that's far from the case, and wholly understand what Paul is doing here is going to be addressed at the end of this episode. But he just said there are 2 stranglers.
Maybe there's 2 Stranglers.
Oh! and we've come to the same conclusion via the curse of 3, the 3-shot secret sign and the medium suspect prophecy. Now at this stage, you might think, well, that must mean that there's an accomplice. But there's a scene that suggests something even darker.
So it wasn't Dwight after all. Great twist. Great twist.
The real killer. The twist at the end. Guys, they told us in the first 25 seconds who the serial killer is. And you know what that reminds me of?
The star has been hidden. Is the little girl hot or cold? Well, it turns out she's burning up because the star is right behind her ear.
And the game's over seconds later.
It wouldn't be fun to end the game that early. The 3-shot secret sign was never meant to solve the mystery. It just opened it up to us. So the journey that this investigation will take us on is to the reveal of the real killer. But now we need to make sense of something else. How can Dwight, who has a serial killer uniform, has killed at least a dozen people and is clearly shown by the creators that he's the Scranton Strangler, or at least one of them. I mean, how can he not be the real killer if he's doing all the killing? Well, the real Strangler must have influence. The real Strangler must be a guiding voice. A voice that's
In your head, zombie, 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 hey, hey, hey.
Now, this is supported by at least 2 other elements in the show, and the first brings us to another one of the many motifs of the show. In this case, the puppet motif.
Michael is so dumb that he tries to put his M&Ms in alphabetical order.
Oscar, Toby said he left my Girl Scout cookies on my chair.
Was that the program where all those puppets live in the barrio? Mm-hmm. I love that show.
Hey, Kevin, it's Oscar. I'm looking at the sheet you sent me, and I can't seem to find the column for shipping costs.
Just once, I would like to be a puppet master and have nothing go wrong. Is that too much to ask?
You know, I might have actually been probed by Alf. You might think he's a puppet. You never see the lower half, but there's a lower half.
Ah! Erin, what are you doing?
I've been turned into a puppet.
Okay.
Look at the puppet. Hi, puppet.
You date a guy. You find out he was engaged to your coworker, so you throw cake at him. It's over. You start liking him again, so you ask him out with a puppet show.
Puppet.
Okay, I think we are set. We have puzzles, string for cat's cradles, burned this last night, little road trip CD, puppets.
And as I've already said a dozen times, guys, repetition forms a motif. And I've linked a summary and explanation of that for those of you who haven't actually seen that. So there's that for you to check out if you need to. But it forms a motif. And the interpretation of this motif in the context of what we've discussed so far in this episode is pretty straightforward. We have a puppet and we have a puppeteer. And in this case, the suggestion is that Dwight is the puppet. He does the killing, but the puppeteer is the killer. Now, the second edition element that reinforces this concept is Star Wars. For those new to the channel, movies provide us with critical concepts that help us to understand the Scranton Strangler mystery. For those of you who haven't seen this video, I've linked it right here for you as well. Now, Dwight actually dresses as a Sith Lord in one episode, so the question for us is, what is the primary concept that's being communicated from Star Wars to us? And I believe it's this.
Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
Star Wars fans will know that after the Jedi initially defeated the Sith, they went into hiding, and they developed the rule of two, which would help them remain undetected while they rebuilt their strength and plans. The rule of two meant you always had a master and an apprentice. Now that concept, I believe, is the primary one being communicated to us by the creators. A master and an apprentice. A puppeteer and the puppet. So now, Kamasabi, let's get back to the medium suspect suspect prophecy. In the beginning of this episode, I said that there is a lack of objective direction. Now, this starts to change once we realize the relationship between Dwight and the second Scranton Strangler. Because in order for Dwight to be somebody's puppet or apprentice, they need to have significant influence over him. Or to put it in a much simpler way, who in the office could convince Dwight to murder? So let's start with the most suspected, because I think this one's the easiest. You have to say Angela, right? I mean, she even explicitly asked to kill someone in the series.
Okay, so everything you need to know about the target is in here.
So what's the job?
Murder.
Okay, that's the big one. That's the big M.
And this is obviously putting aside the fact that they get married and ultimately will have children and so on and so forth, right? But it's never the person you most suspect. So she can't be the puppeteer, but I think it's fair to say that she is the most suspected. So now we are left with two more suspects, the least suspect and the medium suspect. Now, guys, before I reveal to you my thoughts, I want to encourage everyone to comment in this moment. There's a specific reason for this. If you think about what we said in the beginning of this episode, the problem up until now with the medium suspect prophecy was a lack of objective direction. However, if the true analysis of the medium suspect prophecy is correct, you and I should largely get to a unanimous decision around who the three suspects could be. Because in this interpretation, we are left with a very narrow parameter, and that parameter is who could convince Dwight to murder, right? So if you disagree with my three, please comment why. If you think they should be ordered differently, please comment why. But even more importantly, if you think it's an accurate depiction or if you think it's an accurate analysis, please write it down. It's the only way to validate this interpretation. And I might as well take this moment to tell everyone to subscribe as well, right? But more importantly, please comment your opinion on the three suspects. So, the final two, in my opinion, are Michael Scott and Pamela Beasley. One of these two has to be the medium suspect. Now, the case for Michael is pretty straightforward. We know they are somewhat of a duo throughout the series. I mean, Dwight does somewhat, and I want to emphasize that somewhat, hang on to Michael's every word.
Could you send Dwight in here?
Yeah. Dwight, Michael wants to see you in his office.
You wanted to see me?
Mm-hmm. I have something very personal I would like to discuss.
But a closer look would suggest a different picture. I mean, we know that Dwight tries to usurp Michael.
I could save the branch.
Really?
If you let me run it.
And as we progress throughout our investigation, you're going to start to notice that Dwight is constantly sabotaging Michael. For example, in the golden ticket mystery, and I've linked that here for you guys, I can tell you now that Dwight was responsible. So really, Dwight will jump on any opportunity to get rid of Michael if it would arise, right? And similarly, Michael is also throwing Dwight under the bus on a number of occasions that we've already discussed on this channel. For example, in the Survivor Man episode, Michael is trying to tell us where Dwight committed a murder, dismembered the body, and buried the body parts. So he's more than happy to collect or share evidence on Dwight's crimes. But I guess you could also say Michael seems to have intimate knowledge of these things. So it doesn't completely absolve him as a suspect. I just feel that the conflict between the two wouldn't put him in the medium suspect level. I think it would make Michael the least suspect. So that means that the medium suspect is Pamela Beasley. And I want to bring some critical scenes to your attention. Compare this moment to this. Pam clearly exhibits a strong influence on Dwight, comparable only to that of Angela. I want you guys to think about that for a moment. The only other person who could halt Dwight in such an example is Angela. And we see almost an identical connection between the two there, right? Dwight clearly listens to Pam. Here's another example. Compare this.
Call it off, okay? It's way more complicated than you think. Cancel the magician. Trust me.
Oh, okay.
Or what if
Okay.
we discuss the idea of doing the party totally normal? Like, not mean.
To this.
What is this?
I found Dwight's wallet in the parking lot.
Oh my god, what are we gonna do?
I don't know. I don't know what the best play is. Buy a horse on the internet? I mean, I don't know what to do. What do you think?
I know. I know what to do.
Okay, what?
Okay, put everything back exactly how you found it. Hey, Dwight. Jim and I found your wallet in the parking lot.
The wallet scene is usually interpreted as Pam's genius in making Dwight almost prank himself, if you want to put it that way. But is it really? Her mannerisms are the same as when she's trying to protect Nellie from the magician prank. It seems to me as though Pam was in Dwight's corner in this moment. And this was really early on in the series, guys. Think about that. Look at the parallel. Was she pranking Dwight or was she protecting Dwight from the prank? I want to also remind you that it's Pam who convinces Dwight to disable the doomsday device. When Dwight has his concussion, he clearly has strong feelings for Pam. And in this observational context, I think Pam would be the medium suspect well above Michael Scott. And I would like to take this moment to officially announce that Pamela Beasley is under investigation as a primary conspirator in the Scranton Strangler serial murders. Now, I know immediately this will raise questions among some of you. You know, what is her motive? Why? How did we get to this moment? And I'm afraid that's going to have to be left till another episode. Well, then you might ask, why cover this at all? Well, guys, I've already delayed the analysis of the pilot. And the reason I've delayed it is unless we wholly understand the relationships in the office, and unless we wholly understand the nature of the mystery, we will be unable to analyze the pilot effectively. And understanding that Pam is the medium suspect and a primary conspirator in this mystery is critical to the interpretation of the pilot episode. And we're going to get to that episode soon. I think there's only one episode left until we just get into it and we start the investigation from episode 1 onwards. Now, we are nearing the conclusion of this episode, and I did say we're going to come back to Paul Lieberstein's interview. So let's see if this starts to make a little bit more sense to us now that we've understood the medium suspect prophecy. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is the amount of tells that Paul does. I mean, look at the amount of times he touches his face.
About Toby and the Scranton Strangler being the Scranton Strangler. You've heard of this theory?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's been a long standing, it just got new legs.
Yes.
Well, when you were writing the show and when you were acting in the show, did that ever cross your mind?
No.
Not once.
Paul Lieberstein is undoubtedly hiding something. So we've made sense of the two stranglers' comments.
There's a world where he was the strangler. Maybe one where he wasn't. Maybe there's two stranglers.
Oh!
And really, when you look back at it now, guys, it's pretty straightforward. There's a second killer, both from the perspective of the medium suspect prophecy, but also the perspective of fun. It's just not as fun to tell us in the first 25 seconds unless we go on a journey to discover the real killer. And I want to remind everyone just briefly here, Pam is the medium suspect. Dwight's not a suspect. Dwight is 100% guilty. But part of our job in this investigation is going to be to prove that Pam is guilty, right? So at this stage, she's just a suspect. Now, the next part of this interview is something that's referenced by a lot of fans as the final piece of the Scranton Strangler puzzle. And that part is obviously that the Scranton Strangler never killed anyone. He would only strangle them and then, leave them alive.
The one thing the Strangler did was he strangled people but didn't kill them. He left them once they've been strangled and passed out.
Is that true?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm not sure we ever got around to saying it. But that was always our thing. The Scranton Strangler didn't strangle you to death.
Now let's look at this comment in the context of what we've just analyzed. We know that the real Scranton Strangler is the voice in Dwight's head. It's the puppeteer. It's the master. Okay, so that part makes sense. The real Scranton Strangler doesn't ever kill anyone. That's easy to make sense of. Well, what about the next part? The real Scranton Strangler still strangles people, but leaves them alive. How do we make sense of this? Very easily, my friends. This brings us to another motif of the show. The motif of erotic asphyxiation.
It looks like a classic case of autoerotic asphyxiation.
I feel like I'm being strangled, like I'm at some erotic asphyxiation sex club over on I-84 or the Red Room, say, or Dominic's.
Erotic asphyxiation is the practice of intentional restriction of oxygen to the brain for the purposes of heightened sexual arousal. Autoerotic asphyxiation is when somebody does this to themselves. So the real Scranton Strangler strangles people but leaves them alive, leaves them once they've passed out. How? Via erotic asphyxiation. Now, you're going to tell me how this fits with the medium suspect prophecy. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the Anti-Strangling Task Force on Patreon for exclusive episode analysis.